My beloved child, there came a night when the world around him grew unbearably silent, as though time itself had paused to listen. He stood at the edge of his own despair, burdened by unseen weights, his path lost in shadows. Then, from somewhere deep within, yet not his own, came a voice, gentle but commanding, ancient yet alive. It spoke not in thunder, but in a quiet certainty that stirred his soul. He trembled, unsure. Was it the voice of God, a wandering illusion, or something far more mysterious? And in that moment, doubt and wonder became one. How is your child's health today? Please share in the comments so we can all pray for each other. In the days that followed, the voice returned soft as a breath upon still water, yet firm as a decree written before time began. It spoke a promise that seemed too vast for the fragile state of his life. You will not fail. The words lingered within him like a hidden flame, refusing to be extinguished. And yet, as dawn gave way to dusk, his world unraveled further. Doors once open closed without warning, trust dissolved into silence, and the ground beneath his feet felt less certain with every step. He was a man not given to illusion, nor one who chased empty comforts. There was a quiet dignity about him, a depth shaped by hardship and reflection. And so, this contradiction tormented him not with fear, but with a profound and unsettling question. How could such a promise exist alongside such visible decline? Was the voice a sacred whisper from beyond the veil, or merely the echo of a weary mind seeking refuge? Still, beneath the weight of doubt, something within him refused to yield. It was not blind faith, but a steady, almost ancient knowing, like a memory older than his own life. He carried the promise not as certainty, but as a burden of hope, one that demanded endurance. For in that tension between what was spoken and what was seen, his spirit was being drawn into a deeper mystery, one where truth was not measured by circumstance, but revealed through the quiet persistence of belief. It was not long before another voice entered his path, one not born of silence, but of reason sharpened by certainty. His companion, a man of learning and measured thought, regarded him with a steady gaze that held neither malice nor wonder, only conviction. What you hear, he said, is not divine. It is the mind seeking refuge from its own unraveling. A pattern, a coping illusion, nothing more. His words were precise, almost surgical, cutting through the fragile veil of mystery with the blade of logic. They walked together beneath a dimming sky, and there, between the fading light and the rising shadows, their worlds collided. One spoke of evidence, of neural echoes and conditioned belief, of how the human mind, when pressed by despair, fashions voices to survive. The other, quiet, composed, did not argue with force, but with a presence that seemed anchored in something deeper than explanation. He did not claim certainty, nor did he reject the possibility of error. Yet within him lived a stillness that no argument could disturb. Then explain this, his companion pressed, his tone tightening. Why does your life worsen if this voice is true? And for a moment, even the wind seemed to pause. The man did not answer at once. His silence was not defeat, but contemplation, a reverence for the weight of the question. When he finally spoke, it was not to win, but to reveal. Perhaps truth is not proven by ease, he said softly, but by what it awakens within us when everything else is stripped away. In that moment, the tension between science and faith did not resolve, it deepened. And though doubt stood tall beside him, it did not eclipse the quiet, unshaken light that continued to burn within his soul. In the quiet days that followed, the world did not change at once, but it began to bend in subtle, unspoken ways. What once appeared ordinary now carried a quiet strangeness, as though unseen threads were being drawn together before his very eyes. A name he had not spoken in years surfaced in a chance encounter. A closed path, long abandoned, opened without warning, and moments that should have passed unnoticed lingered with a weight that stirred something deep within him. He did not rush to name these things as miracles. That was not his nature. There was a dignity in his restraint, a wisdom that refused to mistake every flicker of light for revelation, yet neither could he dismiss what he was witnessing. The pattern was too precise, too deliberate, as though an unseen hand was arranging the smallest details with quiet authority. Then came the dreams. They did not arrive as chaos, but as visions clear, measured, and filled with a presence that felt both ancient and near. In them, he walked through places he had never seen yet somehow remembered. A voice familiar, unmistakable guided him, not with commands, but with knowing. And when he awoke, the echo of those dreams did not fade like ordinary sleep. They followed him into the waking world, aligning with events yet to unfold. He began to sense that he was no longer moving blindly through life, but stepping into something prepared before him. Not everything was revealed, and not everything was understood. But beneath the surface of uncertainty, a quiet realization took root. Coincidence had begun to feel like intention, and chance like design. And though questions still surrounded him, they no longer unsettled his spirit. For within the mystery, he felt not confusion, but a growing, undeniable order. The turning of fortune did not go unnoticed. Where quiet favor had begun to gather, so too did a shadow rise to oppose it. From among those he once trusted, emerged a man whose eyes held a restless fire, subtle, calculating, and veiled beneath polite words. This was no open enemy, but one who moved in whispers, planting doubt where truth had taken root, twisting small matters into burdens, and casting suspicion upon the character he had guarded with quiet honor. At first, the disturbances seemed trivial, misplaced words, altered accounts, opportunities withdrawn without cause. But soon, the pattern revealed intent. Doors that had opened with promise, now closed under unseen influence. Voices around him shifted, no longer warm, but cautious, distant. And though no accusation was spoken aloud, its presence lingered like smoke in still air. Within him, a storm began to rise. He was not a man easily shaken, yet this attack struck not at his strength, but at the unseen foundation beneath it. Doubt crept in, quiet and persistent. Had he misheard the voice? Had he mistaken illusion for guidance? The promise, once carried with solemn resolve, now trembled under the weight of circumstance. Fear did not announce itself loudly. It settled in the spaces between thought and breath. And in those moments he found himself standing at a threshold, to retreat into silence, or to remain, though the ground beneath him no longer felt certain. Yet even as his spirit wavered, something within him refused to fully yield. It was not confidence, nor clarity, but a deeper resistance, like a flame shielded from the wind. For though the darkness pressed closer, it could not extinguish what had been awakened. And so, the battle was no longer around him, but within. There came a day when all that had once held form in his life gave way at once, as though an unseen hand had loosened every stone of his foundation. His work, once steady and honorable, slipped beyond his grasp with no clear reason. Agreements dissolved, trust faltered, and doors that had seemed certain were shut without explanation. What little he had preserved in diligence was scattered, and the quiet dignity he carried could no longer shield him from the weight of loss. His provisions diminished, not in a single moment, but in a slow, unrelenting decline. Resources thinned, opportunities vanished, and each passing day demanded more than the last could restore. Even those who had once stood beside him withdrew into silence, their absence more piercing than any spoken rejection. Familiar voices faded, and the warmth of companionship was replaced by a distance that no effort of his own could mend. Yet it was not the loss of work or provision that struck him most deeply, it was the fracture of meaning. The promise he had carried, guarded with such solemn care, now seemed to stand in direct opposition to all that unfolded before him. What he had believed to be guided now appeared abandoned. What he had trusted now seemed uncertain. Night fell heavier than before. He walked alone beneath a sky that gave no answer, the stillness pressing upon him with an almost sacred weight. And there, stripped of every certainty, every assurance, he could no longer remain silent. The question rose not from defiance, but from the deepest place within him, a place untouched by pride, yet wounded by absence. "Are you real?" The words broke from him, not as accusation, but as a cry carved from the raw edge of truth. It echoed into the silence, unanswered. For the first time, the voice he had come to know did not return. The absence was not merely quiet, it was vast. A silence so complete it seemed to swallow even the memory of what had once been heard. And in that void, Doubt did not come as a sudden force, but as a slow unraveling. Each moment stretched, each thought questioned itself, until even the faintest trace of certainty seemed to dissolve. Yet even here, at the very edge of collapse, something remained. Not strength, not clarity, but a presence within him that refused to disappear entirely. A fragile thread, nearly invisible, yet unbroken. He could not name it nor fully understand it, but it endured where all else had fallen. And so he stood emptied, questioning, undone yet not entirely lost. For in the depth of his surrender, though he did not yet perceive it, the foundation of his faith was not being destroyed, but tested in its purest form. In the days after his cry pierced the night, a silence settled over him unlike any he had ever known. It was not the gentle quiet that precedes understanding, nor the sacred stillness that once carried the whisper of the voice. This was a silence that felt vast, immeasurable, like a horizon with no end, where even the memory of sound began to fade. He waited, first with patience, then with urgency, and at last with a quiet dread that crept into the deepest corners of his being. The voice did not return. Morning came and went without a sign. Night fell without presence. The unseen guidance that had once stirred his soul now seemed withdrawn, as though it had never existed at all. And though he listened with every fiber of his spirit, there was nothing. No whisper, no echo, not even the faintest trace of the certainty he had once known. It was in this absence that the true weight of his journey revealed itself. For a man such as he, solitude was not unfamiliar. He had walked alone before, and had endured hardship with a composed and reflective mind. But this was something different. This was not solitude, it was abandonment, or so it seemed. A question lingered, unspoken yet relentless. Had he been mistaken from the beginning? He moved through his days with quiet discipline, his outward composure unbroken, his presence still marked by a calm that others could not easily read. Yet beneath that stillness, a deeper tension unfolded. Each step felt uncertain, each thought turned inward, searching for a trace of what had once guided him. The world around him continued, indifferent, while within him, something fragile trembled on the edge of dissolution. And still, he did not collapse. There was a dignity in his endurance, a refusal to descend into despair. Even as the silence pressed harder with each passing hour, he did not curse the absence, nor did he abandon the path entirely. Instead, he remained watchful, waiting, though he no longer knew for what. At times, he wondered if the silence itself was the answer. Yet such a thought offered no comfort. For what is silence if not the absence of reply? And what is a path if the guide has vanished from sight? Still, somewhere beneath the layers of doubt and quiet fear, something endured. Not a voice, not a sign, but a presence too subtle to define, too faint to trust, yet too persistent to ignore. It did not speak, and yet it remained. And so he walked on, not in certainty, but in a tension that sharpened his spirit, a threshold between belief and surrender, where even silence began to take on a form of meaning he could not yet understand. In the quiet aftermath of that long and unbroken silence, something within him began to shift, not as a sudden revelation, but as a slow awakening, like light returning before dawn fully breaks. He no longer strained to hear what was absent. Instead, he began to see. What once appeared as chaos now revealed a subtle order. The losses he had mourned, the doors that had closed, the voices that had turned away, none of it stood alone anymore. Each fragment seemed connected, as though woven into a pattern too vast to grasp at once, yet too deliberate to deny. He realized with a quiet and humbling clarity that nothing he had endured was without purpose. Even the silence, especially the silence, had not been emptiness, but preparation. It was then, in that still and steady awareness, that the voice returned. Not as it had before, not distant, not uncertain, but nearer than breath itself. It did not startle him, nor did it overwhelm. It settled within him with a calm authority, gentle yet unmistakable, like truth remembered rather than heard. I was never absent. The words did not echo, they anchored. And in that moment, every question he had carried lost its urgency. He understood now that the voice had not vanished. It had been deepening, drawing him beyond dependence on sound into a place of knowing. He stood differently then, not restored to what he once was, but transformed into something quieter, steadier, and far more resolute. The turmoil had refined him, the silence had instructed him, and the unseen path had become clear, not through signs, but through alignment within his own spirit. And for the first time, he did not seek proof. He simply walked forward, aware, awake, and certain in a way that required no explanation. The hour of decision did not arrive with thunder, but with a clarity so sharp it left no room for delay. He stood once more before the man whose quiet schemes had unsettled his path, the air between them heavy with all that had gone unspoken. Accusations lingered, subtle and veiled, yet their intent was clear. This was no longer a passing trial, it was a confrontation that demanded resolution. But the greater battle was not before him. It rose within. Every doubt he had carried, every fear that had taken root in silence, now gathered as one final resistance. The easier path called to him return to what was known, abandon the unseen, reclaim control through reason alone. There would be no more uncertainty, no more waiting, no more surrender. Yet in that moment, he understood the cost. To turn back would not restore what was lost, it would only silence what had been awakened. He did not raise his voice, nor did he seek to overpower his adversary. There was no need, for the strength he now carried was not drawn from circumstance, but from a place far deeper, formed in silence, refined in trial, and anchored in something no opposition could reach. "I will not return," he said, not with defiance, but with quiet finality. The words did not challenge, they declared. And with that, the weight of the struggle shifted. The presence within him, once faint and uncertain, now stood unwavering. The fear that had once clouded his mind dissolved, not by force, but by the simple act of choosing. The battle was not won in the world's eyes. No visible triumph marked the moment. Yet within him, something irreversible had taken place. He had chosen to believe fully, without condition. And in that choice, the war was already decided. In the days that followed his quiet but irrevocable choice, the world did not change with spectacle, nor did miracles descend with thunder from the heavens. Instead, transformation came as the dawn came, steady, certain, and impossible to deny once it had fully arrived. What had once been closed began to open, not all at once, but with a precision that spoke of purpose rather than chance. Opportunities emerged where none had stood before, and paths that had seemed lost revealed themselves as merely hidden. His work returned, not as it had been, but renewed, freed from the weight of uncertainty that once bound it. Provision came, measured yet sufficient, restoring not only his stability, but his sense of alignment with something greater than himself. And where relationships had fractured, some were mended with quiet grace, while others were replaced by new connections, individuals drawn not by coincidence, but by a shared resonance of spirit. Yet the most profound change did not lie in the world around him. It was within. The restlessness that had once haunted his thoughts was gone, replaced by a stillness that did not depend on circumstance. His mind, once divided between doubt and belief, now rested in a clarity that required no defense. He no longer searched for signs, nor questioned what had been revealed. The voice that had once seemed distant was now inseparable from his own awareness, no longer heard but lived. Those who encountered him sensed it, though few could name it. There was a presence about him, quiet, unwavering, and deeply assured. He spoke not as one who had mastered all things, but as one who had endured and emerged with something refined, something real. And in his words, others began to find what he himself had once sought, a reason to believe beyond what could be seen. He did not claim greatness, nor did he seek to lead. Yet light, once kindled, cannot be concealed. And so he walked forward, not as one who had reached an end, but as one who had entered a greater beginning, where each step carried not only his own transformation, but the quiet promise that others, too, might awaken. For the journey had not ended. It had only just begun. At its core, this story reminds us that life's most difficult seasons are not signs of abandonment, but moments of transformation. When everything seems to fall apart, career, finances, relationships, it is easy to lose faith, not only in God, but in ourselves. Yet growth rarely comes through comfort. It is often forged in silence, uncertainty, and inner conflict. The lesson is not to avoid hardship, but to endure it with awareness and courage. Faith here is not blind belief, but a steady decision to keep moving forward, even when there are no clear answers. At the same time, the story teaches emotional discipline. Not every voice of doubt deserves to be obeyed, and not every obstacle means failure. For young and middle-aged individuals navigating pressure, comparison, and instability, this message is practical. Build inner strength, stay grounded in your values, and don't measure your progress only by visible success. Sometimes, the most important changes are happening within you, shaping who you are becoming. When you choose to trust the process, learn from setbacks, and remain consistent, you position yourself not just to succeed, but to grow into a version of yourself that can sustain that success long term. Thanks for watching. If you like the video, please like and comment one if you find the story meaningful. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more similar stories. See you in the next part.